Hi, this is Andy Mueller. I'm the General Manager at the Colorado River District. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our first Water with Your Lunch seminar. This one today is put on in conjunction with American Rivers and the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. I think we have a great program coming up. Looking forward to myself and Zane Kessler from the River District presenting on some big river issues and some things going on here at the Colorado River District. And then we'll turn it over to Faye Hartman with American Rivers and Terry Fankhauser with Colorado Cattlemen to talk about their connections to the Colorado River and what they do and what their organizations do and how they collaborate on the river. Before we get into that discussion, as General Manager of the Colorado River District, I want to take a pause to acknowledge the nationwide reckoning on race and institutional racism that we are experiencing. As a government entity representing and supported by the taxpayers of all 15 counties in our district, it is important that the Colorado River District utilize this opportunity to examine where we stand with respect to our inclusion and our service to our citizens of color and our economically disadvantaged communities. I believe that the district has historically done an excellent job representing and serving our majority white constituents. The same cannot be said about our service to our constituents of color. As the leader of our organization, I pledge to spend the time and resources necessary to examine our culture, everything from our hiring practices to our corporate governance structure. I also recognize that we can and must do a better job of reaching out, communicating with, and frankly, listening to the needs of our communities of color on the Western Slope. I look forward to working with many of you on this call and our excellent team at the River District as we develop tangible and meaningful changes as to how we do business. With that, I'm going to welcome Zane Kessler, our Director of Government Affairs, to join me. And Zane, if you can turn on your camera and welcome the folks here at the district, that would be great.
Thanks, Andy. I'm trying to get my camera running here. For some reason, there we go. Thanks, Alicia. And thanks for those comments, Andy. I do appreciate that as a staff member at the district, and appreciate all of you being here today to join us for a conversation on important water issues facing the West Slope, and as well as a dive into some of the big river issues that are affecting folks throughout the Colorado River Basin. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. We encourage folks to engage in the conversation. Use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit questions. There will also be a survey that's posted that's sent out both while we're here together on Zoom. It'll also be sent, a link to a survey will be sent afterwards in a follow-up email to all of you that registered. Again, thank you for being here. I do appreciate it, and gonna advance the slides now and start into our presentation. Many of you may know this, but the Colorado River District was formed in 1937 to serve as the principal water policy and planning agency for the 15 Colorado counties on the Western Slope that form the headwaters of the Yampa, the White, the Gunnison, and the Colorado Rivers. We also represent portions of the Green River and the Dolores River on Colorado's Western Slope. You can see here, it's a pretty vast territory. We represent approximately 29,000 square miles, nearly 1/3 of the state's total landmass. And it's important to remember that we were formed out of controversy. We were formed by the General Assembly in 1937 in direct response to the development of the Colorado Big Thompson project. What was then and is still today the largest Trans Mountain diversion in the state, diverting some 220,000 acre feet a year from the Colorado River Basin across the divide to the Thirsty Front Range. I should also note that our predecessors recognized the need for the West Slope to speak with one voice and to have one entity that advocated for the protection of our water resources on the West Slope. And it wasn't just agricultural water users at that time. It was farmers and ranchers. It was anglers and conservationists. It was the cities and municipalities and industries that were growing on the West Slope. And they really advocated for the formation of the district because they realized a fact that still holds true today. And that is that without water, none of our communities on the West Slope or our local economies would continue to thrive. And with that in mind today, the River District and our staff and our board of directors follow the charge and believe in the mission that we've been charged with to try and bring folks together and collaborate to ensure that West Slope water interests are protected and to look to the future to take actions to protect those resources 10, 20, even 50 years from now. Oh, sorry. Zooming out this slide here, you can see a map of the entire Colorado River Basin and the watersheds that support some 40 million people throughout the American Southwest and the country of Mexico. One thing that sticks out to me when I see this, every time I see it, is Colorado's Western Slope does a lot of work to provide all those people with water. Within the River District's territory here alone, 60% of the Colorado River's natural flow at Lee's Ferry is produced from snowpack. When you include the southwestern corner of the state and our sister agency, the Southwestern Water Conservation District, that number goes up closer to 75% of the river's total flow. Also noteworthy on this slide are the gray areas outside of the basin. You can see that there are large metropolitan areas and agricultural areas that rely on out-of-basin diversions from the Colorado River. That includes the Los Angeles metro area, the Coachella and Imperial valleys, and of course, the growing Colorado Front Range here. So it's easy to say and easy to see when you look at this map that why it is that folks like to call the Colorado River America's hardest working river. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy to dive briefly into a few of the key issues that are affecting us here on the Western Slope and throughout the Colorado River Basin.
Well, hey, thanks, Zane. I really appreciate that. I think Zane touched on this, and the River District, in order to do our job to protect Western Colorado's water, also is charged with assisting the state of Colorado with protecting its entitlement under the Colorado River Compact. And the reason for that is that what happens throughout the basin affects us here in the headwaters in our district. And so it's really critical that as an agency, we are constantly looking at the trends and the science and assisting in the development and leading the development of accurate science and economics that will help our constituents and frankly help the entire river basin survive the challenges that we're facing. So that among the challenges, I just want to hit on three. I mean, there are tons of challenges out there, but the three major ones we're dealing with. The first one I would touch on is just the population growth. Currently, there are about 40 million people who depend upon the Colorado River Basin for their drinking water and their community's supply of water. By 2060, it's estimated that that population could be as high as 70 million. Here in Colorado, we have a population of about 5.75 million, and it's estimated by 2050 that our population could be as high as 9 million. Those are averages. The population numbers predictions are a wide range, but those are the ones that we think are look to be the most reasonable and accurate. The question is, how do we meet that challenge of providing water from this river that we know is already stressed when we're looking at potentially coming close to doubling the population both here in the state and basin-wide? It's really critical, I think, for us to recognize that our major cities are important economic engines throughout the basin and throughout our state. And many of those cities have engaged recently in the last decade in major water conservation efforts, and we applaud that. We think, however, there are a number of land use entities, counties, cities throughout the state and throughout the basin that need to do a much better job with respect to their use of water. The next item I'd like to touch on, the next challenge, is what we call the lower basin's overuse. Sometimes they refer to it as a structural deficit, and I think it helps if we just get rid of the water lingo and call it what it is. They use 1.1 to 1.3 million acre feet each year, more than they're entitled to under the Colorado River Compact. Why do they do that? It ties into complicated legislation and, frankly, litigation before the Supreme Court, which quantified or divided the lower basin share, and it failed to account for lower basin reservoir evaporation and then the transit loss that occurs when the lower basin delivers water out of Lake Mead to the point of use. Clearly, from the upper basin's perspective, that's water being consumed in the lower basin, and it needs to be accounted for. The lower basin states, California, Nevada, and Arizona, have taken steps recently over the last decade to resolve some of those issues, and their overuse has diminished. But this average is still being played out every year. What do we do about that? And I think, well, let me touch on the step that's been taken most recently is the lower basin drought contingency plan. That plan is a great step, but what it does is the lower basin states use less water as Lake Mead drops lower and lower. And because Lake Powell and Lake Mead are operated in conjunction with one another in coordinated reservoir operations, that means as Lake Mead drops, so does Lake Powell. And so Lake Mead, once it drops to very low critical levels, the lower basin will actually conserve 1.1 to 1.3 million acre feet per year. But it's not until that reservoir has reached its most critical level that the lower basin is actually conserving that 1.1 to 1.3 million acre feet. And it's not acceptable from my perspective that the lower basin is going to continue to keep the entire basin in a state of crisis. And so we need the lower basin to step up and use less water. We're also dealing up in our area with rising temperatures, and rising temperatures affect water supply. It's really simple. For every 1 degree rise in Fahrenheit in average temperature, annual temperature, you see between a 3.2 and a 5% decrease in the flow of the river. And that's especially true if that increase is occurring in the headwaters of the Colorado River. This map that's in front of you is a map that shows, it's NOAA data, so data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, that shows temperature change between 1895 and 2018. The darker the color, the greater the rise in temperature. You'll note that the largest area of temperature rise in the entire United States is centered right over the upper basin. Specifically, a large part of our district has seen some of the largest changes. We're anywhere between a 4.3 degree rise in temperature to 3.9 in some of our counties. And that's affecting the flow to the river. And it's really important that we understand that and that we plan for that, because I think everybody's aware that the predictions from every reliable scientist is that temperatures for the foreseeable future will continue to rise. And if we as water supply managers and frankly water users, which we all are, any one of you who's on this call, if we don't plan for that and act accordingly, we will lead ourselves right into a crisis. And so at the River District, we're working on those things. And Zane, maybe you can talk about how we're rising to some of the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think that was a good summary of just a small handful of the challenges we're facing on the big river and here locally as well. And I guess I would just say that one thing we know is that these challenges on the Colorado River system could bring significant changes to our communities and our local economies on the West Slope. And while change can be threatening, it also brings opportunity. We believe the best way to confront threats and to create beneficial change is to do it together. And that's really why we wanted to underscore the importance of collaboration. And that's the reason we have partners like Colorado Cattlemen's and American Rivers here with us today. As I said earlier, the founders of the River District knew that Western Colorado was best preserved when we were speaking with one voice. And so as we think about these challenges that are not going to be solved overnight, I'd encourage all of us in the water community, and whether you're a water user or whether you're with an NGO or a conservation district or conservancy, think about how on the West Slope, how we can all work together to address some of these challenges, whether it be in policy or practice or any other arena. And with that said, there are a handful of areas where the River District is working to ensure that we are protecting the interest of West Slope water users and thinking, using a forward-thinking approach. In my role at the district, I'm the Director of Government Relations. And so most of my time is spent working to advocate with our general counsel and with our general manager and the team at the district, advocating for West Slope water users. We work to maintain a regular presence at the state capitol and in Washington, where we work to inform legislators and advocate on important issues that matter to West Slope water users. This year, I'll say, was a difficult year, both in Denver and in DC, largely due to the coronavirus pandemic and the resulting economic crisis. Those two events combined to impact some of the funding streams that we rely on for water conservation and water projects here on the Western Slope, especially at the state level, where the Department of Natural Resources, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and the general fund in general, took a huge hit. And so we're going to have to think hard about how do we work together and stay evenly yoked in the coming months and years as we ride out this recession and ensure that our water projects are funded and we're doing what we can together to ensure that we're paying adequate attention to these priorities. Just very quickly, a couple of highlights from the Denver Capitol this year that the River District was glad to participate and actively lobby for. House Bill 1159 protected historic stock watering uses and historic water uses in general for West Slope ranchers, protected those uses from being called out by junior in-stream flow calls. We worked very closely with Colorado Cattlemen's and affected water users and Southwestern Water Conservation District on that, and succeeded with broad bipartisan support. The second bill, 1157, extended and expanded the use of the state's in-stream flow program, in-stream flow loan program, while simultaneously providing meaningful protections for West Slope and agricultural water users. That was a priority of the environmental and conservation community, but it serves as a great example, just like House Bill 1159, of the broad support we can achieve and the good policy outcomes we can achieve when we bring everybody together, when we collaborate and we have thoughtful conversations on the best way to approach these policy decisions. Both of those bills, just as an FYI, passed the House of Representatives with unanimous support, 63 to nothing. Overwhelming support, including unanimous support in the relevant committees in the Senate as well for both of those bills. And again, it's just a great example of what we can do when we collaborate and we talk and we work together across all lines. So, Andy, why don't you dive in on a couple of the other items here?
Well, thanks, Andy. I appreciate that. And I think it's important as we talk about that, if we could go back to that slide there, Zane. I think it's important that we recognize the value of collaboration, and I think the Colorado River Risk Study is probably a perfect example. It's a study that the River District, together with the Southwestern Water Conservation District and our 4 basin roundtables on the West Slope, have been engaged in an effort to study the likelihood of a compact haul, and meaning that the likelihood of the upper basin being unable to meet its obligations under the 1922 compact, and not just the likelihood, but then what the impacts would be if that compact curtailment occurred. Who would be affected on the West Slope, and how those curtailment efforts might roll out within within the West Slope inside of each of our subbasins. It's really important work, and it's important to get water users information that they can help make sound decisions economically for their businesses, for their farms, their ranches, their urban water supply. It's really important that we be out there doing that. We appreciate the collaboration that we've had with all of our partners on that. Another one of those things that we're studying is the economics of the potential demand management program that the state is looking at. As many of you have probably heard, the drought contingency plan for the upper basin included as one of its legs, it included a very important program that would be called demand management. All that means is that we would intentionally reduce consumptive use of water in the upper basin and store that in a special pool in Lake Powell and some of the other large federal reservoirs on the system, where we would control that water and use it for the protection of the upper basin should we get close to or actually trigger a compact curtailment. The key on demand management is that it would need to be voluntary, temporary, and compensated. And that's compensation to the water rights owners. But one of the things that we're concerned on the West Slope is we have lots of small towns and large towns, cities that depend upon the agricultural activity around them to make those communities vital. And the question we have is that if agriculture is going to participate in this demand management on the West Slope, how might that affect the economies of our communities on the Western Slope, and how do we protect it from causing damage and certainly from causing irreversible damage? So we're looking at that, and the key there is that we're not doing that on our own either. We're in there with a partnership that is the Southwestern Water Conservation District, the Nature Conservancy, Tri-State Generation and Transmission Company, our partner agencies like the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District, the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users, and the Grand Valley Water Users, all because we know that our communities matter, and we've got to figure out how we make something like that equitable if it's going to happen. The last thing I'd touch on is just something that we do to make sure that we're protecting and keeping the water flowing westward in the Colorado River. Many of you are familiar, again, with the idea that Colorado water rights are a prior appropriation system, meaning that the older rights can pull water to their head gates or to their point of diversion. In the instance of the Shoshone Power Plant right here in Glenwood Canyon, that's a very old right, turn of the century right in the 1900s, that commands a large flow. And when that's in priority and when it's pulling, it prevents additional transbasin water from being pulled eastward instead of flowing westward in our river. That's really important not only for the health of the river, which is critical, but also for our agricultural and industrial users on the Western Slope. It's critical for our recreation communities that need that water flowing past their recreational opportunities in the river. We, as well as a coalition of West Slope parties and governments, have been acting to protect that flow. And for instance, right now, the Shoshone plant is out of commission for repairs, but yet the water is flowing just as if it were in place. And we've done that through a cooperative agreement between ourselves, other West Slope entities, the Bureau of Reclamation, and even the city of Denver. And the question is, how do we make an agreement like that permanent? How do we protect those flows in a very permanent, long-running, meaningful way in order to protect all of those values that are so important on the West Slope? And we're doing that. We're committing our executive team and our engineering resources, our financial resources that are really your financial resources as taxpayers to work on things like that. It's an interesting challenge. It's very complex. But it's a lot of fun. I want to turn, if I can, to the importance here at the River District of keeping a strong West Slope presence in all of these issues that we've talked about, whether they're Big River or the things here on the West Slope that are so critical in terms of our water supply. A strong River District is how we do that. It's been recognized for over 82 years that that's a really important feature for all of our Western Slope communities. So how are we doing fiscally? And I would tell you that since taking over about 2.5 years ago, my team at the district and I have spent a lot of time studying our financial projections, and they don't look good. We're facing a declining tax revenue from the energy industry. We're seeing our revenue get ratcheted down by the spending limitations of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And we're suffering a disproportionate hit from the Gallagher Amendment due to the way it taxes residential versus commercial property on a statewide formula, but not on a district-wide formula. So we end up we're getting hit by those three issues. We've done quite a bit of work tightening our belt here at the district in the last couple of years. We've reduced our workforce by 15%. We have we've cut a number of our expenses, brought down our overall expenses tremendously. But even with those changes, just a few years out, if we do nothing in terms of increased revenue, we can see a time where I'm going to have to reduce our force further, which means that we will be less effective in the challenges that we need to face and successfully deal with on the West Slope. So I made a proposal back in January to our board that the board consider placing a tax question on the ballot in all 15 counties. And that question was to increase our current mill rate, which is set at a 0.252 mil, so less, just slightly over a quarter of a mil. And I recommended to our board that they consider asking the voters to raise that to half a mil. What does that mean for your average homeowner? It's $1.90 per $100,000 of residential value. So definitely a tax increase. We recognize that, but it's really important that we raise that money to fix our declining revenues. But then part of that is also to bring a pot of money that we would leverage to help meet the known needs here on the West Slope for our water supply issues. And I think, Zane, maybe you can talk a little bit about how we would implement that. And I think it's about 86% of our funds that we would be allocating. 86% of that 4.9 million would be allocated to these buckets that Zane's about to talk about. So Zane,
Thanks, Andy. And I would just make sure that we stress there's a lot of uncertainty out there right now. We don't know if the River District Board of Directors will move to place a question on the ballot, and we certainly, if they did, there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether voters would give us permission to increase our mill levy. But we do know that if we did receive that permission from the voters, we'd use those funds to prioritize projects that are multi-purpose projects that meet the needs of one or more of 5 total categories. Those are productive agriculture, infrastructure, healthy rivers, watershed health and water quality, as well as finally conservation and efficiency. And I would note that the district is committed to expending those funds in an equitable manner, which over time disperses the benefits of the program geographically within the district and between those identified categories. Lastly, to tie back to some of those budget shortfalls that I talked about at the state and federal level, and the impacts that we're seeing from the economic crisis that's unfolding before us, I think it's really important to note for folks that the district would utilize those funds to drive the initiation and completion of projects which are priorities for the residents of the district, identified by Basin implementation plans and roundtables, and utilize those district funds as a catalyst for matching funds elsewhere. And so really trying to bring those dollars that are raised locally and spent locally and using those as a catalyst to leverage additional funds from the state, federal, or foundation resources, understanding that there are a lot of question marks around the state budget at the very least for the time being.
And Jane, I can just add, I think your point was a really good one. I want to say I made that recommendation in January to our board. They asked for more information, and in April, we provided additional information to the board about how we might work on this and what the voters might think about it. The reality is the economic devastation caused by the coronavirus shutdown has really led us all to a moment of pause to think about whether it's appropriate to go to the voters and whether we do this. I will tell you that we view the kind of the nexus of water infrastructure development, water project development. And again, when we talk about projects, it's not limited to concrete and mortar. We're talking about projects to restore healthy rivers, to create water that can be released and keep rivers cold and fresh for our recreational and our environmental needs, as well as our consumptive user needs. I just think that there's an opportunity here. Our board is considering it in its July meeting as to whether or not to put that question on the ballot. We'd love to hear from our constituents, from those of you listening, because we're trying to figure out if it's an appropriate ask at this time. It's an unprecedented time, and we're obviously very respectful of the devastation that's occurred to our private industry and our landowners and who would be taxed. And the question is, how do we best serve the community? Can we be part of an economic engine that brings the West Slope back, or should we hold off and not ask the voters at this time? So those are the questions our board is grappling with, and frankly, Zane and I and the rest of our staff. So Zane, thanks for letting me chime in.
Yeah, no, I think that was very well said, Andy. You and I ran over a little bit, imagine that, but we've got a couple minutes left to hold. I've got a couple questions here. Why don't we take one of these and then we'll hold the rest until the end, so not to encroach on our other presenters' time. And for the time being, I'll dish this one to Andy. A question we got was, what is the status of Colorado's water plan and what's being done to fund the plan?
Well, that's a great question. Zane, Colorado's water plan, as I think many of you are aware, was a document and an effort, multi-year giant stakeholder effort led by the Colorado Water Conservation Board to create and identify a plan to identify, frankly, the needs, which we knew there was a gap in terms of water supply and water need as we looked in the future. And how do you meet that gap? That plan talked about all sorts of ways in which we could reallocate water or build better infrastructure, help restore healthy rivers, support the recreation and agricultural community. It really was a document that not only talked about solid actions, it also helped develop a sense of values in terms of protecting the environment and helping create a recognition that, for instance, the Colorado River, which serves all four corners of our state, is a river that is largely overtapped. And so how knowing that, how do we move forward and meet the economic and needs and the population growth that our city or our state is facing? It really, the plan identified these projects through a large coalition of issues. It also identified that there was over $100 million in a per year gap in funding. So it's not just a water supply gap, it's a funding gap. And, myself and Zane and others at the district have been involved in a statewide effort to bring together a very diverse coalition of folks to help try to find a way to fund that gap. That was a question I think many people saw at Proposition DD that was on the ballot last November. That was a beginning, a start. Obviously, sports gambling hasn't been making any money this year due to the coronavirus. Hopefully it will be what we would consider a down payment in the future towards meeting that $100 million gap. But that's part of why at the River District, we're taking the opportunity to say, look, we need to drive our region's future. That gap, that funding gap exists particularly in the West Slope and how we protect our water resources. And so funding that ourselves and moving forward as a region is a solution for us, but it's also part of the statewide solution. So that's where the water plan really plays into it. So.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate that response. I see a handful of other questions here from some of our friends and folks that I don't know. T. Wright, Victor, we'll do our best to get to your questions. You've all posed some great questions. I think now, again, so that we don't encroach on Terry and Faye, we'll move to them, and then assuming we've got some extra time at the end, reassemble and have a bigger Q&A session after Terry and Faye have finished. So thanks, Andy. I also got a note that I'm echoing. Can you guys hear me okay? Thumbs up? All right. Well, with that, we will bring on Faye Hartman. Faye is the conservation director for the Colorado River program at American Rivers. American Rivers, I should say, is a great partner. We've really enjoyed working with them on a handful of projects and ideas, and just a partner in the conservation and recreation community that is always open to having a conversation. And so, Faye, thanks for being here. I'm gonna go away for a few minutes and listen to you present. So.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Zane and Andy and everyone at the River District for hosting the first Water with Your Lunch and for asking me to participate in today's presentation. So as Zane mentioned, my name is Faye Hartman, and I'm the Conservation Director for the Colorado River Basin program with American Rivers. I'm really excited about the opportunity to present a little bit more about the work that American Rivers is doing on the Western Slope, and more importantly, talk about the critical partnerships and collaborations that we have with a lot of different stakeholders, including the River District and Colorado Cattlemen's Association. Before we dive into a little bit more on the specifics, I want to give a little bit of background on American Rivers. We're a national river conservation organization that's focused on protecting wild rivers, restoring damaged rivers, and conserving clean water for people and nature. We have offices all over the country that focus on different river basins and the water management issues in those areas. Our Colorado River Basin program works on projects and policy from the headwaters here in Colorado and Wyoming all the way down to Yuma, Arizona. So I'm sure most of us on the webinar would agree that rivers are the lifeline of the Colorado River Basin, and really in the state of Colorado too. They support our communities, they irrigate crops and livestock, they allow for recreation, and they're really critical habitats for the important plant and wildlife species. And at American Rivers, we recognize that everyone needs and really deserves a healthy river. And in the Colorado River Basin, our work focuses on three main areas. First, we work to safeguard healthy ecosystems, so by protecting and restoring clean flowing rivers and providing critical climate refugia. We support thriving communities and agricultural heritage. We work to create policies and programs that promote thriving economies that include recreation and agriculture, and that raise the profile of communities across the state and more broadly in the Colorado River Basin. And we provide clean water. Using innovative partnerships with many different stakeholders, we work to ensure there's enough clean, reliable water for agriculture, for people, for the environment. So a good portion of our work that we do within the Colorado River Basin is happening here in Colorado and also more specifically on the Western Slope in partnership with many different important partners and stakeholders. I think, when I think about collaboration, I really think about finding shared values, and we can use these shared values that we have to collaborate with stakeholders across the Western Slope, more broadly within the state of Colorado, and really within the entire Colorado River Basin. And we want to ensure that we're able to get projects done that allow for rivers to be healthy, for agriculture to thrive, and for communities to be strong. Andy mentioned this earlier, but I think one of the best examples of collaboration across the state of Colorado was the development and now the implementation of Colorado's water plan. So as he mentioned earlier, the state, the CWCB finalized Colorado's first water plan in 2015. And that was developed with a really broad variety of water users and managers and stakeholders, including basin roundtables. And I think most excitingly, Coloradans across the state. The state received over 30,000 comments from Coloradans in all four corners, which is really incredible, and I think demonstrates the importance of water management, and rivers to people across the state. Since the plan's completion, a lot of these same stakeholders that came together to develop the plan, as well as others that are newer to the process, have worked together to collaborate on many different types of projects that meet the goals and the values described in Colorado's water plan. So some of these include developing and implementing stream and integrated water management plans. They think about, they've worked on projects including upgrading agricultural irrigation, improving municipal conservation, and restoring important watersheds across the state. And these are just a few of the projects. There's lots of others that have happened as well. And I think building on the success of the collaborative efforts that the water plan development and implementation have started, as Andy mentioned, a diverse group of statewide water users came together to identify ways to fund this water plan gap. And I think also importantly, continue to elevate the importance of water across the state of Colorado. We all understand the importance of water and healthy rivers, and we want to make sure that everyone else does too. American Rivers believes that a diverse and collaborative coalition, for example, the For the Love of Colorado coalition, is really important. This group came together because we have shared values around water, and implementing Colorado's water plan to ensure our communities, our economies, agriculture, recreation, and rivers all have enough water to thrive into the future. Beyond that, I also, that really great statewide effort, I also want to share a little bit more about some collaborative projects that we're working on the ground in the western slope of Colorado. So for over a decade, 12 years, we've been working with a very diverse set of stakeholders on the Upper Colorado River Wild and Scenic Stakeholder process. And that process covers the reach of the river of Upper Colorado River from Kremling to Glenwood Springs. And I'm sure, as many of us know, that's a really popular recreational reach for both fishing and boating. I know I've spent a lot of great afternoons on the river there. And this project is one of the best examples, in my opinion, of a successful collaborative process with strange bedfellows, right? The stakeholder group consists of state and federal agencies, local governments, the environment, and rec interest, landowners, anglers, the river district, and then the large Trans Mountain diverters on the Front Range. So this group came together to think through how we can protect this reach of the Upper Colorado River. And this collaborative group developed a management alternative to a federal wild and scenic river designation with the intention of protecting the values, these outstandingly remarkable values that were identified in the 2007 eligibility report, and then also in the 2015 final suitability report. And this final amended and restated plan really seeks to find a balance between the permanent protection of these outstandingly remarkable values, while still providing the important flexibility for all water users and yields for water projects. And I think I think for everybody involved in the stakeholder process, it's exciting because this collaborative stakeholder-driven process is nearing a successful completion. And I think we can all agree that collaborative efforts aren't always easy, but by working together, we can really establish a plan that helps and meets kind of the shared values of everyone. So the stakeholder group has developed metrics and management options that help to ensure protections for these values of the Upper Colorado River, while also allowing existing uses to continue. The second project I want to talk about is a restoration project known as the Irrigators of the Lands in the Vicinity of Kremling, which is kind of long to say, so also known as the ILVK project, which is restoring 12 river miles, 11 different landowners, also on the Upper Colorado River in Grand County. And these restoration solutions which include replacing headgates and restoring riparian and in-stream habitat, work with the river system, while also improving agricultural irrigation, soil and water quality, and important aquatic habitat downstream. And so this project and the solutions are really a win-win-win, right, for the river, for the local ranching community, and for recreation. And I think, again, this is, you know, another example of a project that worked with many different stakeholders: Drought Unlimited, agricultural communities, West Slope and Front Range providers, local agencies, the River District, American Rivers was involved, that helped to support and find funding for this project. And I think, you know, one of the things that I really like about this project is that it illustrates the connection between, you know, rivers and ranching and agriculture. Healthy ranches need healthy rivers, and healthy rivers need healthy ranches. And I think this is a project that that we can all get behind. The last project that I want to mention is a project that we're working on with, again, Drought Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, several different ranching families, the state of Colorado, the River District, and Grand County on the Upper Colorado River Water Conservation Project. And so this water conservation project and feasibility study is going to help understand conserved consumptive use projects. And the intent of this study is to identify potential benefits and impacts of conserved consumptive use on agriculture, crops, on soil, the environment, and really help to better understand the potential social implications of conserved consumptive use, ensuring that it doesn't negatively impact rural communities. A couple of weeks ago, some colleagues and partners of American Rivers installed almost 30 soil probes to better understand the science behind how much water remains in the soil, which is going to be really helpful. And, you know, I think there we go. At American Rivers, you know, we believe that collaboration is essential to preserve the way of life that we as Coloradans enjoy. We all have shared values, and I think a lot of us value healthy rivers and making sure that water is available for agriculture, for the environment, and for recreation. And by understanding and identifying what our shared values are, we can work together to achieve these and really and get some really great projects done that have multiple benefits for all different sorts of water users. And as we say at American Rivers, ultimately rivers bring us together and they connect us. So a big thank you again to Zane and Andy and Alicia and Eleanor behind the scenes for inviting us to join this presentation. And a thanks to all of you who are listening in. It was great to have the opportunity to present.
Thanks so much, Faye. Really appreciate that and all the work you guys are doing. We'll bring you back with Terry and Andy for a Q&A here in just a bit. And while Alicia's getting stuff queued up, I want to introduce Terry Fankhauser. Terry's the Executive Vice President of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. Terry's a great guy and has done a lot of really good work for us here on the West Slope. CCA has been a great partner as well, a longtime partner of the River District. And with that, I will just turn it over to Terry and make sure we can hear and see him. I've got his PowerPoint on my screen at least. So again, I'll go away and be back here in a bit for some Q&A.
Well, I appreciate it, Zane, and do let me know if I'm not coming through clearly. I know we all suffer from bandwidth latency in this day and age, as we do most of our correspondence and discussions virtually, but we are blessed to be able to take and use these times efficiently. You know, as we think about the big river, the Colorado River, and this is from an individual who comes from an eastern Kansas ranch that had to learn a lot about water in Colorado and how it functions on behalf of the probably is one of the most important issues to our membership. It's daunting, it's impressive, it's inspiring, and it's something that is worth a tremendous amount of our time, and certainly we spend a great amount of resources on that, which is one of the questions Andy and Zane laid out today. But the river's captivating, and back to this picture, some of you will notice,
Hey Terry, this is Zane. Hey Terry.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
getting some breakup in your audio here. Wondering if maybe if you turn your camera off, that might save some bandwidth and
Let's try
might
that.
come through a little clearer. Thanks, Terry.
Let's try that. I appreciate it. Let me know if that continues to be the case, and we'll try to adjust or make use of something different, like a call in. Individually, you see here is Leonard Horn in Bloom Canyon, bobbing his horse over onto a lookout rock. In many cases, people thought to watch traffic or just to be able to do it. Others will tell you he was captivated by the river and wanted to see the river in a way that few others could. And I think a lot of people have similar feelings about the Colorado River.
Hey, Terry, Zane here again. Unfortunately, we're still getting some feedback, just breaking up here and there. Andy,
Zane,
you jump in and see if we can, how about, let's see if we can't get the four of us just on camera, if Alicia can pull the PowerPoint. And we'll start off with you, Terry, and you can just talk to us a little bit about the work you're doing. If that doesn't work, we'll just jump into a broader Q&A with the team and everybody that's here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I apologize.
No, it's all right. It's the inherent flaws in technology. So I'm here with camera on. And again, Andy, I don't know if you can jump in, or Alicia, if you can bring Faye in.
I'm here.
All right. We can try to get Terry back on camera too without the PowerPoint, see if that, excuse me, if that helps at all. So Faye's here. All right.
Hello.
Well, this is, you're watching Water with Your Lunch. Thanks for being with us, folks. And we'll get Terry back as soon as we can. I'm getting a bunch of great questions here. I've got one from Victor Lee, and maybe I'll direct this to Andy to start. And the question is pretty simple, but I'm sure it has a complex answer. Question is, what efforts is the River District pursuing in coordination with other upper and lower basin states?
Yeah, that's a great question, Victor. At the River District, we tend, when we're on interstate issues, to work through our partners at the CWCB, and particularly with Commissioner Becky Mitchell, who's a commissioner. Not only is she the executive director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, she is also our state's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission. And so myself and Peter Fleming and our chief engineer, John Currier, serve as advisors to our commissioner, and we engage in cooperative efforts with representatives from all of the other states through the Upper Colorado River Commission. We also have our deputy chief engineer, Dave Kanzer, who's very active in the Salinity Forum that deals with the salinity issues in the Colorado River. It's a very broad-based stakeholder group that brings Dave in contact with people from all 7 states, and we're really involved in that. Through some of the pilot programs on the system conservation pilot programs that we saw, we engaged again with various partners from throughout the basin. And then there's a really interesting one that we do, and I think, Victor, you personally are probably well aware of it, but others may not be, and that's our cloud seeding efforts that we engage. We manage a Central Colorado cloud seeding effort together with funding from entities throughout the basin. So it's really, it's things like that that we do interact with other states and other shareholders. Looks like Terry's back.
It does look like that. Welcome back, Terry.
Okay, I'm on a cell phone. Is this better?
Much better.
Much better.
Much better.
Oh. So I will try to advance these slides. Again, I apologize, folks. It's as Zane said, it's just one of those issues with technology. So let's see if we seem to be having a bit of an issue. There we go. I can advance my slide maybe. Very slow, but let me tell you a little bit about the Cattlemen's Association, if that works. In 1859, Colorado started to populate. While there wasn't a tremendous amount of gold found in Colorado, I'm just reading a few notes here, there was a tremendous boom in agriculture, and agriculture spread across the state. It did kind of generate out of the Front Range into the mountains, but a tremendous amount of agriculture, and quickly everybody understood very quickly that water was the lifeblood of a state like this. The Cattlemen's Association was founded in 1867 in Denver. It's an organization that's been around for over 150 years already. And again, one of the foremost issues that we address daily is water. So what I'd like to tell you about is really the underpinning of agriculture in many places in Colorado, and then I'll get into the River District area boundary as well. The only reason I bring that up is to emphasize the fact that agriculture also returns other things to the environment and to society, economy, basically beyond just cattle production. But for those agriculturalists to be able to do that, they do have to maintain a robust economic portfolio in producing beef or feeds or grains or hay. But it's a large industry in Colorado of agriculture. Scale-wise, the beef industry is about 68% of that, and it really covers about 65% of the land mass in Colorado. So it's a fairly broad spectrum industry. This graphic, many of you will recognize, was created around the water plan, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but we do think about that gap. Agriculture has a gap as well, and part of that will come from buy and dry, which I know we all work very carefully to preclude from happening. But we also hear a lot about agriculture having roughly 60% of the adjudicated water out there. Well, that in some ways is correct if you count the number of water rights. It's not necessarily correct related to the water usage, though. Much of that water usage is put into other forms like food and fiber. A fair amount of it goes to other resources as well, in the form of return flows and junior water right holders, but also the subsistence of things like riparian areas and things along those lines that are very integral in value to a place like Colorado. But within the basin, there's about 1 million acres of ag productive land, and then about 900,000 out of basin that get watered out of the Colorado River, and that's over $1 billion in the economy. So you can see both in Colorado River Basin, but also beyond that the water as it flows and as it's used is very integral not only to the economy, but the environment, and also certainly for those individual farmers and ranchers. This will break out that utilization, and I'm not sure if this is really a current slide, but I suspect our friends from the River District will tell you that this is probably fairly close related to the water utilization or water allocation out of the river. But as we think about the River District, and really frankly all other water and agriculture, one size doesn't fit all. You've got to be dynamic, so that's why it's important to have a fully functioning district, integrally involved stakeholders and partnerships and collaboration. We talked about several programs. Andy mentioned, demand management. And that's something that certainly I think most agriculturalists want to see implemented flexibly, voluntarily, and incentivized. We look to the future. We look to the next generation, and we don't want to impede the ability for that water to stay in agriculture. In fact, that's our fundamental mission, is to keep those agricultural waters in agriculturally producing hands. It's a simple concept, but it's a concept that takes a fairly structured water law. And protecting those water rights is something that we look to daily in agriculture. And we want to keep those managed in a way that are functional and that we can continue to see the multiple benefits from irrigated agriculture to the environment and the economies. But also, very importantly, is our communities. Water is the lifeblood not only of ag, but it's also the lifeblood of our economy and our communities. And we want to see, we really need to pay special mind to that as we think about our rural communities. But it isn't without being responsible that agriculture thinks about these things. This graphic tells you a little bit about how we try to continually improve time and time again through sustainability practices. We want to keep our emissions to water low. We've worked on those and seen a 10% reduction over the recent past. We've seen a reduction in water usage amongst agriculture and processing. We're trying to pull those things down. And as we talk about climate and other things, you'll see other elements reducing in agriculture. So we're continually improving and becoming more and more efficient. Agriculture doesn't talk a lot about those things, so education and collaboration is important, and we offer those services to our members as well as technical assistance. We're currently working on the water plan, was indicated earlier, stream management planning, actual water quality projects, enhancements to small-scale infrastructure, and being able to work for funding and resources to assist producers. You'll see that I put in a small font, just a little tongue-in-cheek down here, but public policy is absolutely integral. And I know what the River District, Andy, Zane, and the board are struggling with. The one thing that I would say, and I know there are many questions that we must struggle through to find sure footing if we're to move forward with any sort of fee or tax increase in the state. But there's probably never going to be a perfect time to do that. And time does march on, and so do issues. And one thing that we can't continually to see ourselves do in agriculture or associated businesses like water and other things is to believe that we're going to starve ourselves to a solution. It does appear that those are modest fee increases that are being talked about. And every time we wait years or more time, it's just like a water project. It becomes more and more expensive and more challenging to get to. We must protect our water rights in Colorado. We must protect our environment, our recreation, our economies, and our communities. And we rely heavily on the River District to do that. And we have to all acknowledge that we're going to have to provide tools for them to be successful. You can find a bit more about the organizations here. But with that, thank you for your patience with the technology, and thank you for the invitation to be with you today.
Thank you, Terry. That was a great recovery. Did an excellent job. We really appreciate working with Cattlemen's. I'd invite you, Terry, to come back in with your camera when you can. There you are. And I've got, I think, all four of us here now. I'd welcome an opportunity just to jump into kind of an open Q&A with the four of us and to dive into some issues. I'm going to jump just because I think some of Terry's numbers on economics were really important and something we all keep a very close eye on. And dish a question to Faye Hartman. The question is related to the economic impacts of recreation and water-based recreation. Faye, I don't know if you have data or numbers that you can speak to on that, but it might give us a great understanding of the value of recreation alongside and complementary to the value of agriculture. So why don't you jump in there?
Perfect, definitely happy to jump in. I think recreation is obviously personally, I think it's excellent. And I think it's really important for lots of local economies in Colorado and on the West Slope. And I think it's very much becoming an important part along with agriculture for many West Slope communities. And I do have some economic numbers associated with recreation. This all came from a recent study that Business for Water Stewardship completed earlier this year. And I can give some high-level overviews, but Business for Water Stewardship has a lot more kind of technical breakdowns available on their website. So feel free to check those out if you want to learn more at businessforwaterstewardship.org. But yes, Colorado's rivers and the recreation associated with rivers are huge economic drivers for the state and for local economies. I think according to the Business for Water Stewardship report, direct spending by both residents and then tourists who come to Colorado generates an estimated $9.9 billion in economic output, and then contributes $5.4 billion to the state's GDP, which is really great and impressive numbers. And then not only is it the economic value, but also the jobs numbers. And so, I think when I think about communities on the Western Slope and around Colorado, there's a lot of jobs that are tied to recreation, and the Business for Water Stewardship report found that it's close to 81,000 jobs that provides over $3 billion in household income for those folks that are employed in kind of river-related recreation. So it's pretty significant. And then when you add all of that up and you think about all of the multiplier effects that are associated with river-based recreation, the big number is that recreationalists and the retail spending associated with them generate an estimated $18.8 billion in economic output. So that's, all big numbers.
Great. Thank you, Faye. That's super helpful. And I think it's clear from the numbers we've seen from Terry and from Faye that the industry is related to agriculture and recreation, and their reliance on water in general is important for all of us, regardless of whether you're a recreationist or an agriculturalist.
And I want to stress, if I can, just a minute, Zane, just to make sure. I think sometimes in our discussions, there's a polarization of recreation and ag.
Right.
I think, Terry and Faye are really good examples of how there shouldn't be this zero-sum game between the two. That I think that the way our state works, the way the West Slope works, when we have good water supply and it's cool and it's clean and it's in the rivers for recreation, it's also there for ag. And it's complementary benefits that ag provides to the rec and rec provides to ag really need to be stressed, and we really need to be working together as residents of Colorado and not looking at each other as others, if you will. So I just want to stress that we all eat food, and frankly, we should all recreate. So how do we get together and a value? So
I think that's a great point, Andy. Next question, I'm going to dish to Andy, but it's from one of Terry's members. T. Wright Dickinson is asking, will this proposed tax question or mill levy increase, if passed, be prohibited from retiring agricultural water rights? And T. Wright, with your permission, I'm going to add on to that. In addition to T. Wright's question, ask Andy, what happens if we don't go to the voters? What happens if we do? What's the do nothing alternative look like?
Sure. Well, what I can tell you, and T. Wright, not only is he a member of, I believe, Colorado Cattlemen's Association, he's a former board member at the Colorado River District. So let's not forget that. I think the question's a really good one, and our board has a long-standing policy of taking no action that would lead to the retirement of agricultural land in the Western Slope. It's not a prohibition that's built into the draft of the question that we have. We've done quite a bit of work and polling on that, work with lawyers in terms of what we can and cannot put in there, and how we can ask a question about a very complicated subject like water and the protection of water resources in a way that the electorate can understand it and support it. That's not built into the question, but I can tell you that it's built into our policies at the River District that our board unanimously supports and will continue to support. So that would be my answer to that one, T. Wright. And then Zane's add-on, what happens at the district if we if we don't receive voter approval to do this? Well, I think first, I think the West Slope as a whole will suffer because of our inability to get those needed identified projects that serve all of those multi-purpose needs on the West Slope. And what that means is that as the climate continues to warm and as we experience hotter and drier summers like we had in 2018 and even at the end of 2019, that we saw in 2012, if we don't have the water resources to manage our rivers properly, we're going to see all of our industries, whether it's rec or ag or our power industries, our cities suffering severe consequences. So that's on a larger macro scale. On a river district scale, our advocacy and our ability to make a difference at the state and federal level, our ability to leverage all of our partnerships will be diminished. I will have no choice as the general manager but to downsize our staff. One thing I want to point out, if we receive this tax increase, I have pledged and our board has pledged not to increase our staff. We're not going to the voters to say, hey, allow us to grow and become a bigger government. We can be effective and we can do these things with the staff we have. But I know that if we don't, I can tell you 2 years from now, I will be making cuts to our staff. And that's going to be really hard. We don't have excess capacity. We don't have excess bandwidth. And so what that means is our collaborative work in our basins is going to suffer. Our ability to look out and lead the science effort in the basin is going to suffer. And so that I don't want to see that. I don't want to see our mission become less effective or our organization become less effective. You're muted, Zane.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. And we've got about 5 minutes left before I'm going to ask a round robin question of each of the three entities left here. And it's a question, maybe we'll start with Terry. The question, I think it's a great one, is how can West Slope residents better engage on water issues? And I'll qualify that to say with their governments or with NGOs and organizations such as Colorado Cattlemen's. How can folks better engage on water issues, in your opinion, Terry? Terry, you're muted. Ah, there you go.
There we go. Yep, I have a two-step mute process going here. It's a good question, and I think it's one that we all have to take a step back and be sensitive to the fact that we may know our own water rights fairly well, but we don't always have more of a basin perspective and engagement on our water rights sometimes. And that's a tough thing for somebody to hear that has spent a good portion of their life wearing out long-handled shovel handles because they understand and their water well. They understand their smaller basins well, but it does take a part of us to give back in time and engaging at a variety of levels if we're going to be successful in having a broad spectrum of issues considered that are important. And I can't say this enough, that you can't wait till something has partially progressed and then want to step in and change the trajectory of it. T-Right's a good example, and there are many more on this call, that spend a formidable amount of time and resources of their own engaging into what is not an inconsequential value component of their business portfolio. And I think if the River District does decide to move forward with a tax measure or not, the irrigators in the basin need to lean in, and they need to lean in strongly. And they're going to have to even lean across the continental divide and lean across the border, lean to the lower basin and become involved and engaged and supportive of those water rights, because times are a-changing, as they say, and these issues move swiftly. They have a lot of engagement from outside interests, and it's really important that people give a portion of their time if they expect solutions to be delivered to them as it relates to their water.
Thanks, Terry. Faye, how about you? What do you think folks can do to better, West Slope residents can do to better engage on water issues in general?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways. You know, as I think Andy mentioned earlier, you know, the Basin roundtables on the Western Slope are a great way to get involved and to learn more about the water issues that are kind of happening more locally in your area. So, you know, you can always find out more information about those roundtables online, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot there. I know I always do. And then the other thing I would say is engaging with your local watershed group. There are so many amazing watershed groups that are focused on a particular region, river, or stream or area that have lots of opportunities to get involved, you know, get outside and volunteer, whether it's restoration projects or recreation opportunities or, you know, kind of multi-benefit projects. They're a great way to connect with people in your community and make a difference on your local river.
Thanks, Faye. We're right at the end, but I'd be foolish if I didn't give my boss the final word. And before I do, I would say thank you all again for being here. Really appreciate it. A reminder that a survey is in the chat function and you'll get an email from us. Thanks to American Rivers and Colorado Cattlemen's. And I'll dish to Andy for the final response and closing remarks. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Zane. I just want to, I'll just reiterate, we really appreciate both Faye and Terry, you guys spending time, and more importantly, we appreciate the efforts of your organizations working on behalf of our constituents, our mutual constituents, and we really appreciate it. We want to thank everybody for coming and participating. We really have enjoyed being able to bring you this presentation, and we look forward to future ones. We'll have those on our website and get those out on social media. In these days of the coronavirus, it's hard to productively interact with people. So we really do appreciate you guys, everyone out there taking the time at lunch today to join us. And thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
All right, thanks, folks. Have a great day.